Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to Tenbound's virtual conference. I want to thank you all for joining us for this session. It promises to be a really engaging discussion. I want to introduce Jeremy Donovan, and he will introduce the rest of his esteemed panelists. In the meantime, I wanted to remind everybody that this session is being recorded. Without further ado, Jeremy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. Delighted to be here and delighted to host a couple super talented RevOps leaders. So today our topic is going to be how RevOps supports sales development, driving the evolution. So again, how RevOps supports sales development. As I said, we've got two super talented RevOps leaders, and I'm going to introduce them briefly. I'm going to ask them, I don't love just sort of plain vanilla intros, so I want to start giving you guys value immediately. So I'm going to ask them each to not only introduce themselves, but to also share one of their favorite sales books, because I geek out on books all the time. So they didn't know I was going to ask them that question. Hopefully they don't have the same answer, but they'll have to change in the moment. So I'm going to start out with Sean Lane, who is the director of operations over at Drift. And if you don't know who Drift is, they are one of the leading conversational marketing platforms. They have over 50,000 customers. So Sean, I'd love for you to introduce yourself a little bit more deeply and share with us what's your favorite book, sales book.
Thanks, Jeremy. Hey, everyone. Really excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me. As Jeremy mentioned, I'm the director of operations at Drift. My favorite book, I think, is From Impossible to Inevitable. And it's just chock full of lessons depending on where your company is at and its maturity and its evolution. There's a bunch of stuff you can take out of there as you're going through your growth. So that's it for me. Excited to be here.
Outstanding book. Aaron Ross wrote that book in addition to Predictable Revenue, and I think he might have a third book out there. So yeah, great ad. And then Scott, going to turn it over to you. So Scott is the Vice President of Revenue Operations at ZoomInfo. I think just like Drift, ZoomInfo probably needs no introduction, but they are a platform that puts sales and marketing professionals in a position to identify, connect, and engage with qualified prospects. So hopefully I did justice to what they did, but I'm sure everyone knows who both those companies are. Scott, you want to introduce yourself a little further?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I'm Scott Sutton. Like Jeremy mentioned, I'm the VP of Revenue Operations at ZoomInfo. As for my favorite book, I mentioned this last time we spoke, but I come back to cracking the sales management code. For me as a RevOps leader is something that's really helped me center our team around how we measure our business, how we derive things, not only top line metrics, but really the day-to-day activities that drive those behaviors that increase our outcomes and lead us to success. And should be a lot of that in today's discussion.
Awesome. And just to round things out, I'm Jeremy Donovan. I'm the SVP of Sales Strategy at SalesLoft. And someone asked me, I often ask people what their favorite books are. I'm rarely asked. Someone actually asked me that on LinkedIn earlier today, and I gave them three. I couldn't just get away with one. So one of them is Question-Based Selling, which is lesser known but outstanding. Two is a complement to the Cracking the Sales Management Code that Scott mentioned. It's the Sales Manager Survival Guide, a little more textbook-like, but really covers everything comprehensively. And then the New Strategic Selling, which is not so new. It's probably a 30-year-old book written by the founders of Miller Heiman, which is a sales training company. Well, now that we got the books out of the way and the intros out of the way, Scott, did you need to show any kind of like a safe harbor statement or anything like that?
Let me see if I can get this to work. Does that show now for y'all?
It's coming up there. Yeah, it's gradually loading, but maybe just give us the gist.
Yeah, just as we're now a public company, anything today from my side, don't make a forward-looking purchase of stock based on anything I say. And I'm not declaring any future intent. So all that being said, hopefully we can share some of the business without getting anyone in trouble.
Awesome. I know that every time I attend a Salesforce presentation of any kind, they have to do that as well. So I have empathy for you. Well, let's get right into it. And when we were prepping, we discovered some things about ourselves, which we'll reveal along the way. I also want to invite participants, please ask questions and go along. This is meant to be a dialogue, not just amongst the three of us, but also with you. So drop your questions either in the chat section or in the Q&A section. And we will get your questions and hopefully near real time. But I'll start things off, and I'm going to start things off with Sean. And let's just hit the topic right off the bat, which is how do you currently partner with your own sales development organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. By the way, I look forward to the day that I have to put one of those slides up to put my disclaimer. I'm very excited for that. So the way we think about partnering between ops and our SDR organization at Drift is really centered around some of the routines and cadences that we have with that team, right? So from a structural perspective, we have someone on our sales ops team who is specifically designated to work with the sales development leaders. And so that partnership for us is pretty important in giving them a dedicated resource that they can be constantly working with on both sides. And that's helpful for both the sales development side and from the ops side. And then when we think about some of the routines that we have with them, I kind of think about them in a handful of buckets. So one is just how we're working together on any sort of major projects or priorities and making sure that we always are getting together to stay aligned on what's important so that ops is never running in one direction while SDR is going in a different direction. The second routine is all about metrics and goals and how are we performing against our goals and are we paying attention to the same things together. And number three is, I think, a function that RevOps more specifically can play, which is how are we aligning our SDRs to the rest of the go-to-market organization? And so making sure that there are normal routines in place between the SDR team and the sales reps to make sure that we never have any gaps or opportunities for things to drop off there. So for us, like the foundation really starts with those routines.
Right. I do have some follow-up questions, but I'd love to get Scott's perspective on this as well, and maybe I'm going to merge those questions together. And again, if you're just joining, we had a few folks join as participants. We're definitely welcoming Q&A in the window. So Scott, how are you partnering with your own sales development organization?
Yeah, so we, like Sean mentioned, we're closely tied together. We interface with that team often. We actually have a unique relationship in that the senior manager of outbound sales development 50/50 reports into my org and acts as a product manager of our RevOps solutions for their business. And I think we all found that we've all run SDR teams at a point in time or had some role in sales development. And we worked together, and he had a very operational mind in that capacity. And now he's kind of one foot in each camp, but it's making sure that we have the right definition of the requirements for what we're pushing into their organization. We understand what their key objectives are. He understands ours and how to bring things through our process. And then we have a really tight feedback loop on any metrics and improvements that we want to make. Beyond that, we're doing all the things Sean mentioned, which is measuring our business, coming together as a leadership team, talking about it, and then pushing changes back in. But that unique pivot role is actually pretty helpful for us.
Yeah, our way at Sales Loft of addressing that is we have leveraged that model from the HR world where you have HR business partners. So we have a new CRO who brought this incredible idea of having sales and RevOps business partners. So not only do we do the functional things around analytics and planning and compensation and so on, but we also have people who have this overlay role where they meet on a weekly basis with different general, think of them as general managers, but different sort of owners of different sales segments in order to give them insights. We call them insights meetings. Coming back to you, Sean, you mentioned partnering on major projects. I'm curious about maybe one of the major projects that you've done with the sales development organization that you're kind of more proud of because it was successful, or give us one that you thought would work and didn't land exactly where you thought it would.
Yeah, I could probably give you both from the same project, to be honest with you, in terms of its evolution. So the one that comes to mind for me is we partnered really closely between ops and SDR to develop what we call our SDR day in the life, right? And when we think about what an SDR is working from in terms of their home base, but really what it means for when leads are delivered to them. And so we worked really closely with those leaders on the ops side, the systems that deliver leads, right? How do we get the right leads into the right people's hands at the right time? But then ultimately, what does it look like from the SDR side in terms of what they do with those leads? And I think to your point about, things that could go poorly, I think we had to figure that out along the way. And we made a bunch of mistakes, right? We made a bunch of mistakes in terms of what we showed to SDRs, how we prioritize them. And so by having that partnership to get that feedback, not just on what the dashboard looks like, but ultimately the quality of the leads and what the follow-up looked like, that allowed us to start to improve both how quickly we were able to follow up, but also the efficacy of that follow-up. And I think the other thing that we learned as a part of that process too is it's really tempting to spend a lot of your time and energy focusing on enabling the SDRs in that scenario. And of course, that's super important. But the thing that we learned and got better at over time was how we enabled the managers and how we enabled the leaders within the sales development organization to be as well versed and be able to take action on that information just as well as somebody in ops might be able to. And so the resources and the views that we put in front of a manager became ultimately the thing that made us significantly better, and we were actually able to move the needle on the results.
I love that you asked that you mentioned enablement in there, because it actually relates to a question that we just got in the chat, which is all about the scope of what RevOps is. And I think this is probably a common question whenever RevOps as a topic comes up. So Scott, maybe I'll have you handle that one, which is, at ZoomInfo, what's the breadth of revenue operations in terms of it including sales, marketing, customer success, facets of enablement? How broad or narrow is your RevOps?
Yeah, so our RevOps specifically, we have the traditional sales ops functions where we manage Salesforce. We have quite a large team, so we have a bunch of developers and admins who are building out custom automation. We have data and analytics people building our data lake and doing data manipulation and architecture and doing data visualization as well, and so driving the metrics on that side. We then have another team that we coined as RevGen. And so if you think about a demand gen team that's really focused on driving leads in for the outbound team and doing account scoring models and person fit models, they're really a data-powered email marketing engine. And they also do all the one-to-one touch. So while marketing does one-to-many broad blasts from ZoomInfo to you, if we're doing sequencing Jeremy to Sean in the middle of a deal cycle, that's where that RevGen team comes in. And so we cover pretty much everything from the lead coming in through the deals being closed and also dealing with the customer business. And I like, Jeremy, what you said about the business partner. What we have is a product management team, and it's a similar function where we're trying to go more and more to be a more professional development shop. And so having a build team with a product management org that is aimed at marketing, is aimed at SDR, is aimed at new business, AE, it allows us to really be in tune with their processes and drive requirements to the build team and be that bridge. So that's our scope of RevOps.
So it's fascinating that you actually not only have these people sitting in that business partner capacity, but they are actually product management, product development types of people who are collecting requirements. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, is like feeding from sales dev back into the product organization. I guess I'll shift that now that since we're ping-ponging themes here. Sean, I'd love to get your perspective on what RevOps can do in order to capture product service requirements from the sales development organization and funnel those back into the mothership.
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to both of you guys, our SDR team is using our own product, right? And so we're in a little bit of a unique situation where we are the number one customer of Drift at the same time. And so we've got this team of SDRs who we are encouraging and they are actively using Drift, but we also need them to tell us the stuff that frankly, it needs to be better, right? And so we very much rely on them both from an ops perspective and from a product perspective to give us that feedback. And then I think, to Scott's point about that, like product management, they use the title, but while we don't say that, it's that same type of mindset of how do we make this thing better? And so then some of those routines I mentioned at the beginning, we have very similar ones on the product side. And while that isn't necessarily part of RevOps, we very much try to enable those same type of conversations to take place between the SDRs and our team so that when SDRs at other companies are using Drift, our SDRs have already vetted all of the different use cases that there might be, given feedback and we've made improvements so that when we have our customer success team or whoever having those conversations with SDRs, we can use ourselves as an internal example or a case study to point to and say, oh yeah, we heard this exact same thing from our outbound SDR team, and that's where, you know, the prospector product came from, right? So those types of examples I think are super important, and you know, we very much drink our champagne in that respect.
Yeah, I second the motion on using the sales development team as your alpha testers and beta testers for you know, not just to source new ideas, but as you get new ideas. We have one that we're working on that is a way to, you know, when if ZoomInfo doesn't have the data, we still need to try to figure out an email. We have a sort of API driven utility that we've built internally to be able to do that. We're thinking about exposing that to the outside world. So our SDRs are testing that out right now. So I think it's brilliant.
It's awesome.
Scott, I wanted to come back to something you said earlier, which is you have your head of sales development reporting 50-50 into two different managers. That is often a very complex thing to do. Can you talk a little bit about how you're doing that and some of the, you know, what's working, how to avoid pitfalls?
Yeah, and so on that, it's actually just one individual, who, not the whole org that's split. But it is interesting because then it's, if you have a slow month, do you then put more effort here? If there's a big project, do you put effort here? And so I think Brian Vital is our VP of Sales Dev. He's an incredible leader, and I think because I understand and I've lived that fight and I know what it's like to be, you know, down 2 runs in the 9th and you're trying to get everything across the line, rolling out an entire new demo routing and lead scoring model at that moment, you know, you need to pick your spots. So I think that comes from a leadership alignment in setting clear prioritization for that individual to make sure that, okay, we need to be leaning more 60-40 or 70-30 this way. But then there are the Herculean op efforts where, okay, the team's humming, they set their demos, they're doing well. Let's put a bunch of effort into this new thing that's going to propel us to the next level. And so it really comes down to him, Brian, myself, making sure we have the right priorities and are doing the right things. I would say it's like anything, like to paint it as perfect every time would be an overreach, but that's the only way it does work.
Yeah. I was going to transition a little bit into basically processes and optimization processes for your sales development team. And I'll kick this off just to frame it. So I was fortunate enough to work for former McKinsey consultants for about 8 years of my career. And they taught me this optimization process because that's what consultants do. And a little bit's ripped off from a book, yet another book called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. So the idea is bright spot analysis. We will stack rank our SDRs on performance by some metric. One of my favorite metrics is the number of activities it takes to source an op. So the fewer activities it takes for you to source an op, the more effective you are. So we'll stack rank them on that metric so that we know who our snipers are, if you will, and then who our folks that are still learning are. And then we'll take the top, 5%, 10% of them, and the bottom 5% or bottom 10%. We don't tell them who's who. And we look at both the quantitative side. So what are they doing differently in the metrics that we can measure? But then we also kind of, look at the qualitative side, talk to them, understand, what they've done inside or outside the system. So one example of that we found for this is a while back. We found that one of our top performing reps were creating like a separate single step cadence that they never ended. So it was just a mechanism for them to put their top prospects in to give them a little extra periodically. So that was an example of both the process and one of the outcomes. Sean, I'll turn over to you. What sort of do you follow a similar process for optimization of the team, or do you do anything different?
Yeah, your example is reminding me of an example within our team about the notifications that our reps get when one of their target accounts is live on the website, right? And so we would see this behavior from both again, I think there's like both a qualitative and quantitative component, but you would see the top reps who were booking the most meetings, and you were having conversations not just about the content of how they were doing their outreach, but also their behavior. And what you would find is that they were taking these notifications and they were purposefully leaving them on their desktop. because that was the only way that they could retain them. And so they would click on those only when they were actually live on the website. And then that was also their follow-up list. And so all of a sudden this became this behavior that we could provide back to the product team and say, hey, we need a way for these notifications to persist so that someone can know not only that one of their prospects was on the website live so they can reach them in that particular moment, but also they can use it then for prioritization and follow up after the fact. And so I completely agree with you. There's a qualitative and quantitative component to these, but a lot of times I think for folks who are trying to better understand the behavior of SDRs, it's a super simple thing, but you actually just have to sit with them, right? And in this new COVID world, that might mean some screen sharing or some shadowing or recording of what their workflows look like, but just seeing how they interact with the stuff that you as ops have produced for them, I think is pretty critical. And if you just ship a dashboard and say, all right, good luck, the chances of you actually learning very much about how they're using it and why they're successful or why they're not, I would say are pretty slim.
Yeah. Reminder to folks who are listening, I am monitoring very closely the chat and the Q&A, so feel free to drop stuff in there. Scott, I'm going to turn that over to you. Is there anything, that counterintuitive, exotic that you've tried with your sales development organization?
Counterintuitive, exotic. I would say one thing that we do that's controversial amongst SDRs is just an anecdote. So when I came from a background in manufacturing and automotive and dealing with design thinking and kind of this lean process engineering. And so I try to approach things in a data-driven way, break things down to their constituent parts and find areas. So I think, Jeremy, where you would do more bright spot, I was almost looking at failure points of weakness and theory of constraints, kind of a way of thinking. One thing that I noticed is everyone said it was hard to find new accounts. It was hard to find good accounts. And wouldn't it just be amazing if everything could be provided, the best contact at the right time? And that's like the holy grail. But people don't want to give up on that prospecting, that source of, the sense of self-worth of, hey, I found that guy. I found that contact and I closed that deal. So when I came in and I was working on the SDR team, both myself and the director of demand gen at the time, we had this view of sourcing all these perfect accounts for everyone and getting away from prospecting and delivering in an automated way, pre-populating tasks. And I think now with the data and the team that we have, we're able to execute against that. And we've actually gotten away from true prospecting. Our SDR team is given these accounts, given these contacts to prospecting to. And it didn't come without a lot of trust, a lot of trial and error and testing. And we started with a lot of the things you guys mentioned, which is looking at the best SDRs. How are they finding their accounts? Where are they finding their accounts? What are the characteristics and the traits of those accounts? So we could act more and more like them with our automation. So I think Jeremy might have froze, or maybe I froze. Sean, are you still there?
I'm here. I can hear you loud and clear. So maybe, Scott, I'll ask you a follow-up then. So in that kind of evolution that you've made, once you started to get to a point where you were starting to provide the accounts to people, I guess, one, how did you figure out what the best accounts were? And two, how did you know that was actually working?
Yeah, and I think it comes back to one thing we hit on early, which is having the data to measure the process and understand the differential outcomes. So oftentimes we looked at the standard metrics on the email side of, how many are open, how many replies, click-through rates. We're looking at connect rates on all of our contacts. We then funnel that through. We have a system by which everything gets set as a demo. It has to go through a demo, convert it to an opportunity, so we can trace it all the way through the funnel to close one. And we would build out models, whether it's now an ML model or before just looking at kind of basic analysis of what are my best industries, what are my best number of sales employees or revenue size, employee growth, all of those characteristics, and started to pit the two groups against each other. And it was an eventual transition. We had initially said, okay, let's go 50-50, let's go 70-30, and now unless you've been here forever, it's 100%, you're getting all these campaigns run for you. So I think you have to prove it with the numbers, and it's got to be gradual. I think just cutting over and moving is probably too challenging.
Yeah, I think the gradual part of that is probably the most important part. And I think if you're hearing, some of the resources that you have or some of the setup you guys have with this machine learning approach, I think it's very much a crawl, walk, run type of situation, right? So if you can start very basically, I know at Drift, we started with a firmographic score. How good of a fit is this company for Drift? And then we started to build from there, and later on layered on top a behavioral score, right? Someone subscribing to your blog is a different level of intent than somebody who is chatting in via the Drift widget, right? And so as we started to layer these things in, all of those started to become components of how we delivered leads to SDRs, how they prioritize those leads, and kind of what the expectations were in that follow-up. But I think if you expect to be perfect right out of the box or expect your first score to be the most sophisticated thing, then you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, definitely. I'd be curious to hear from those who are on and participating. Sean, Jeremy, and I, we all talked about leading an SDR org, being in a RevOps role. And there's some things that I think about now that, I wish I would have had this insight at that point in time, or when I was an SDR leader, I wish ops would have done this for me. I'd be curious to know, Sean, your answer to that, as well as if anyone's at a crossroads or they go, I just can't get this out of RevOps, maybe we could help provide a direction that you could navigate that conversation, or if it seems like too big a leap, maybe an incremental step to try to get closer to that vision that you have. So Sean, maybe an insight from when you were an SDR leader, something that you wish RevOps understood that now you're able to see on this side.
Yeah, for sure. And anybody else who has a thought on that, please pop it into the chat. I think thinking back to when I was an SDR leader, the thing that I ended up learning that helped, I think, me in ops later on was just how nimble an SDR organization needs to be literally on a day-to-day basis, right? And so I remember we would switch reps sometimes depending on either lead volume or a particular campaign that we were running. We might even switch them from inbound to outbound if we had a particular need for it on a daily basis, right? And so I think sometimes now I can see from myself on the other side that if you add a longer time horizon to some of these changes or ideas or motions, you might be handcuffing those teams a little bit. And so I think as much as possible, if an SDR organization and a RevOps organization can align on which parts of their go-to-market operation need to be nimble, then ultimately those things you can either enable the team to move fast on their own, and you can democratize some of that power, or you can have that very clear understanding of where RevOps is going to jump in scenarios where a lot of the companies, for folks who are are listening today, are trying new things and are trying to experiment and do different stuff on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And so I think being nimble to that was probably the thing that I learned the most.
I'm gonna hop back in. Hopefully you guys can hear me.
We can.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, my power went out, so thanks for taking over. We got 2 minutes left, so we're just going to go into wrap up mode here, and I'll start with you, Scott. What's what kind of your one best piece of advice for how sales development leaders can partner with revenue ops leaders?
Yeah, I think it's setting a clear vision as a team of where you'd like to go. I think the theme that we talked about a lot was this is an evolutionary journey, and along the whole way, it's not going to be boom, suddenly you deploy something and you're at full maturity and you're crushing revenue goals every single day. I think it's every day coming in with a mindset of attacking the problems that are in front of you, making the process better, and doing it as a unit, and doing it, like Sean mentioned, being nimble, making small tweaks and adjustment, measuring them, measuring outcomes, and continuing to get better. And nothing is sacred. I think you have to be able to point out what's not working, and there's no love lost in pointing out failures or misses. We always talk about that was a big miss. We need to do it better. That was a big miss. We need to do it better. And I think once you get used to that, it's just something that breeds excellence and getting better every day.
Yeah. How about you, Sean? Anything to add on top of this, know your North Star and make those small changes every day?
Yeah, I would just say for the SDR leaders, don't be afraid to get into the nitty gritty of how the system works, right? Chances are your team success and how your team is viewed in the organization probably lives and dies by how these things get delivered to your team and what you do with them, right? And so knowing every single nook and cranny of how that works is part of the gig. And so I would say that goes for both sides, on the RevOps and on the sales ops side. Like no, on the SDR side, no detail is too small to try and figure out when it comes to actually making the team successful.
Yeah, and kind of my last comment on the partnership is just about trust. Is that I often see sales. I was a sales development leader. I know Scott and Sean. You guys both were too. I was so tempted to get in the weeds with running Salesforce reports and spending a lot of time on analytics and so on. And what I should have done then is just to trust the RevOps team to go ahead and do like a lot of that heavy lifting, and so that you can actually come in and add value on top of that and spend more time with your team. So that'd be my ad. Well, again, thanks so much for being with us. That was Sean Lane, who is the Director of Operations at Drift, Scott Sutton, who is the Vice President of Revenue Operations over at ZoomInfo, and I'm Jeremy Donovan from SalesLoft. Please connect with us on LinkedIn. Sure, we'd love to hear from you. And then, Catherine, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Well, thank you, everyone, for a really incredible discussion. Thank you so much. And thank you all the participants for joining with us as well. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Scott.